In tonight's news edition, more than 1,600 Syrians crossed into Jordan in the past 24 hours. Syrian jets attack an eastern rebel-held town as the UN chief and the Security Council envoys discuss how to end the conflict. And Israel's Prime Minister says he will put any peace deal with the Palestinians to a referendum. Good evening and welcome to a new edition of the news, and next are the details. Syrian refugees continue to stream into the kingdom. More than 1,600 new arrivals have crossed in the past 24 hours, bringing to over 170,000 the number who had made it to the kingdom since the start of this year. Zainab Soufa has the story.
Syrian refugees continue pouring across the northern border to find relief in refugee camps, community organizations' shelters, or with resident relatives and friends. Over the past 24 hours, 1,612 Syrians had entered to Jordan and were later moved to Zaatri camp near Mafraq. Zaatri currently hosts more than 176,000 refugees. General Coordinator for Syrian Refugees Affairs Anmar al-Hmoud said about 517,000 Syrians had crossed into the kingdom since the crisis in their country began. Among them were 170,000 who had entered since the beginning of this year. In addition to Zaatri and Mafraq, the refugees settle in the border city of Ramtha, while thousands reside in governorates across the kingdom, including Irbid, Amman and Zarqa. The kingdom has sounded the alarm that unless foreign aid is coming in soon, the unprecedented exodus would further strain its already stretched resources, infrastructure and services in the energy, health and education sectors. Japan is one of the key donors to the Syrian humanitarian cause. During a tour of refugees camps, Japanese Member of Parliament and former Defense Minister Yuriko Koike met young refugees in Zaatri, then continued on to the newly established Emirati Jordanian refugee camp Mrejib Lefhoud in Zarqa.
Now I know the reality, what is going on and what should be enhanced more for the refugees. What about to keep the sanitation of or hygiene, water and toilet and this kind of thing. Now I know the reality and I'm going to check and make a research in Japan in order to provide more support to the refugees' sake.
And according to the UN Refugee Agency, the UNHCR, an average of 2,000 Syrians cross into Jordan daily. Zainab Soufa for the news at 10.
UN Chief Ban Ki-moon and ambassadors from the 5 permanent members of the Security Council discussed possible diplomatic moves to end the Syria conflict. UN sources said mediator Lakhdar al-Ibrahimi wanted to resign from the joint UN Arab League role because he's frustrated with international deadlock over how to end Syria's 2-year war. Meantime, fighting was going on in the capital Damascus and other Syrian cities. Farah Ajlouni has more.
Syrian warplanes in action over the northeastern provincial capital of Raqqa, the largest city to fall to the opposition since the uprising. This warplane was seen flying low over the city before firing rockets. Another video shows the carnage following a series of attacks with scenes of panic and confusion, vehicles on fire and buildings reduced to rubble. Several people were seriously injured, some with limbs blown off. Now in its 3rd year, fighting has intensified in the last month, with government forces attempting to roll back rebel advances. And while the situation deteriorates, the rebel forces' political coordinator said the Free Syrian Army has captured and secured what they believe to be an unexploded chemical weapon. US President Barack Obama said earlier this week that there was evidence chemical weapons had been used during Syria's 2-year conflict. But it was not yet known how the chemical weapons were used, when they were used, and who used them. Speaking in Turkey, a rebel commander said rebels had neither the capacity nor the equipment to launch chemical attacks. He said the rebels had a lot of evidence and were trying to take an unexploded canister found in Idlib province out of the country for testing.
4 days ago in Sarakib, we have some bombs that not explode. We have this chemical weapon not explode, and we put it in container, and we can provide it for any country or any government.
Fears over chemical weapons have increased after several Syrians with breathing difficulties were brought to a Turkish hospital on Monday in Hatay province along the Syrian border. Turkey is currently testing blood samples taken from Syrian casualties brought over the border from fighting in recent days to determine whether they were victims of a chemical weapons attack. Washington has long said it views the use of chemical weapons in Syria as a red line, but is wary of the false intelligence that was used to justify the 2003 war in Iraq. It has said it wants proof before taking action. Farah Ajlouni for the news at 10.
Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu said he would put any peace deal with the Palestinians to a referendum. The statement raised expectations that direct negotiations might soon resume following a 2-year stalemate. It was the second time in just 3 days that Netanyahu has publicly mentioned the possibility of holding a nationwide vote on an eventual accord, and came as U.S. Secretary of State John Kerry met Israeli politicians in Washington to discuss talks. Netanyahu spoke at a meeting with Swiss Foreign Minister Didier Burkhalter. Kerry was due to see Israeli Justice Minister Tzipi Livni later in the day in Washington. Livni has been designated by Netanyahu to be his chief peace negotiator. She was traveling with one of the Prime Minister's top officials and confidants, Yitzhak Molcho. A new crew of the Jordanian field hospital in the Gaza Strip arrived in the Israeli blockaded territory. Gaza 24 will provide medical supplies to the hospital, launched in 2009 to ease the suffering of Palestinians facing severe humanitarian conditions in the enclave. The mobile clinic is serving almost 2 million people as medical staff receive a daily average of 1,200 patients. Gaza 24 will be operational in the coming days. In his May Day message to Jordanian workers, His Majesty the King affirmed that by the workers' efforts in all work sites, Jordan steps confidently into the future. Many Jordanian workers have managed to build a future for their children through simple crafts, having shunned so-called culture of shame. Hiba Al-Atoum has this report.
Job creation has been a key headache for successive governments as the fight against poverty and unemployment tops the national agenda. Governments have sought to tie higher education with the local and regional labor markets. A government-sponsored employment scheme launched last year seekers to create thousands of jobs for university graduates and bring other job seekers into the labor force. But a key concern for labor programs and planners has been so-called culture of shame or avoiding jobs in certain sectors such as sanitation and services. This worker says he is proud of his traditional job, mending old shoes, saying he has ignored the culture of shame. He said he has been in the business for 20 years and now helps his 4 brothers paying their education fees.
I love my career. It's an honor to mend shoes. I advise that instead of needing others, you have to work in such a profession. Now, we don't need doctors and engineers. We need vocational people.
This tailor says he is the breadwinner of a 14-member family and is also proud of his career. He says he needs no one as long as he is able to work.
Thank God I try to make ends meet. I support my wife and 13 kids. It's all from my sweat. I urge Jordanians not to wait for a job, but to seek work in clothing, metalwork, and woodwork.
This segment of Jordanian laborers has carved out their careers, supporting extended families and providing educations for their kids, putting aside the culture of shame. And as Martin Luther King puts it, all labor that uplifts humanity has dignity and importance and should be undertaken with painstaking excellence. Hiba Latoum for the news at 10.
Over to Libya. Saif al-Islam, a son of late Libyan leader Muammar al-Gaddafi, appeared in court in the town of Zintan, where he had been held since his capture by former rebels. Saif al-Islam, at the center of a legal tussle between Libya and the International Criminal Court, the ICC, told reporters he was in good health during his brief appearance. Saif al-Islam is wanted by the ICC on war crime charges, but the case to be heard in Zintan relates to charges that he gave information to an ICC lawyer last year that could endanger national security. He was the only defendant of 13 people who are called to appear in court on those charges. The case was then postponed until September 19th because the defense case was incomplete. A 50-year-old man in central China has died from a new strain of bird flu. The fatality brings to 27 the number of deaths from the mysterious H7N9 virus. Scientists said the virus, which has infected 127 people in China, is a threat to world health and should be taken seriously. Local consumers' worries about the strain have had a big impact on the local poultry market. Aquatic products, as the substitute of poultry, began to grow dramatically in sales. Protesters clashed with police in the American city of Seattle as a May Day rally turned violent after dark. Demonstrators hurled objects at officers who responded by firing flashbang grenades and pepper spray. Officers in riot gear, some riding in armored vehicles, repeatedly fired the grenades and tried to disperse the crowds. Police said one officer was injured and 13 young people were arrested for assaults and property damage. The violence broke out following a day of May Day rallies in cities across the U.S. West that were planned by a coalition of organized labor activists, students, civil rights advocates, and members of the clergy to call for an overhaul of immigration laws. And over to Saudi Arabia. Saudi property developers showcased some of their latest housing models during a real estate exhibition in the capital, Riyadh. The exhibition, inaugurated by the Saudi Minister of Housing, is part of the kingdom's efforts to reform its housing and labor sectors to make it easier for citizens to get places to live and jobs at private companies. The exhibition also comes after a royal decree in April ordered ministries to give up land for development to the housing ministry. Wealthy Saudis have bought residential land plots around the country as long-term investments, pushing up prices and making them too costly for developers of lower-income housing. Hours after they secured a place in the Champions League final, Bayern Munich were welcomed by jubilant fans at Munich airport. Bayern claimed a berth in the first all-German Champions League final when they defeated Barcelona 3-0 for a crushing 7-0 aggregate success that saw them hailed as the new kings of Europe. The Bundesliga champions, chasing a fifth continental crown, will play Borussia Dortmund in the May 25th final at London's Wembley Stadium.
I'm American. You just really
We stay in Germany. Only 2 days after securing their spot in the Champions League final later this month, Jurgen Klopp's Borussia Dortmund squad were back in training ahead of their Saturday Bundesliga clash against Bayern Munich. Dortmund booked his place in the Champions League final after beating Real Madrid 4-3 on aggregate over the 2 legs of set up the final at Wembley. Klopp will most likely be without Mario Götze for Saturday's match, who will join Bayern at the end of this season.
That's funny.
Now a look at the weather forecast. Unstable weather is in the forecast for tonight, with a chance for thundery showers. Winds will be easterly moderate to brisk, blowing dust in most regions of the kingdom. Tomorrow, relatively hot and dusty across the kingdom, with local thundery showers, and winds will be northeasterly moderate to brisk. It will be relatively hot in Aqaba and the Jordan Valley tonight, with temperatures there in high 30s tomorrow. There's also a chance for scattered showers in Aqaba, with northerly moderate to brisk winds and seas slightly choppy. Next are the lows and highs for tonight and tomorrow. To end the news, here's a reminder of our top stories. More than 1,600 Syrians crossed into Jordan in the past 24 hours. Syrian jets attack an eastern rebel-held town as the UN chief and the Security Council envoys discuss how to end the conflict. And Israel's Prime Minister says he will put any peace deal with the Palestinians to a referendum. And that's the end of tonight's news. I am Rad Liptosh. Thanks for watching and have a good night.